On the frigid morning of December 17, 1944, just outside Iwila, Belgium, a jeep crunched to a halt before a checkpoint, its advance arrested by the raised hand of a military policeman, whose every breath materialized as a white cloud in the biting air. Inside sat 3 soldiers, their American uniforms appearing impeccably authentic, their weapons seemingly standard issue, their English almost flawlessly convincing. Yet Sergeant William Creel had received a warning about an unthinkable possibility. A tactic that defied every known rule of warfare and honor. German soldiers could be operating deep behind American lines, cloaked in the guise of GIs, speaking with American tongues. He demanded the password. A flicker of hesitation passed between the men. He repeated the demand. Their English began to fray at the edges. It was then that Creel's eyes caught the Stang gun's British weaponry, that no authentic American patrol would ever carry. In a matter of minutes, the trio was in custody, and beneath their olive-drab uniforms lay the stark truth of German field gray. Untisha Manfred Puris, Oberfenrig Gunther Billing, and Geta Wilhelm Schmidt had just unwittingly become the most notorious captives of the Battle of the Bulge. None of them could have known that their capture was about to unleash the most profound wave of paranoia in American military history, igniting a systematic campaign of cultural interrogation that would transform every checkpoint into a high-stakes quiz show, every casual conversation into a test of national identity, and every fellow soldier into a potential spy. The new mathematics of detection were not being calculated in codes and ciphers, but in the arcane statistics of baseball, the names of state capitals, and the latest Hollywood gossip. The genesis of this exposure had begun weeks earlier, on October 22, 1944, deep within Hitler's headquarters at Rastenburg, East Prussia. It was there that Adolf Hitler personally summoned SS Oberbefehlshaber Otto Skorzeny, addressing him with words destined to violently reshape the war's final months. The Führer had a special mission, one that demanded deception on a scale previously unimaginable. Skorzeny was already a legend, one of Germany's most celebrated and feared commandos. In September of 1943, he had masterminded the daring glider assault that liberated Benito Mussolini from his mountain prison at Gran Sasso, spiriting Il Duce away in a light aircraft that barely escaped the rocky plateau. Then, in October 1944, he had orchestrated the abduction of Miklos Horthy Jr., a move that compelled Hungary's regent to abdicate, thereby keeping the nation locked in the war. Now, Hitler laid before him his most audacious assignment to date. German forces were to unleash a colossal counteroffensive tearing through the Ardennes forest, with the ultimate prize being the vital port of Antwerp. This attack was designed to sever the American and British armies, a deliberate echo of the breathtaking victory in May 1940 when German panzers had blitzed their way to the English Channel in a matter of days. This time, however, everything hinged on speed. The Germans absolutely had to seize at least one bridge across the Meuse River intact before Allied engineers could demolish it. Skorzeny's task was to create a specialized unit, Panzer Brigade 150, for the sole purpose of capturing those bridges before they could be turned to rubble. Hitler then unveiled a decision that gave even the battle-hardened commando a moment of pause. This objective could be achieved far more swiftly, and with significantly fewer casualties, if Skorzeny and his men were to wear American and British uniforms. Small disguised units, Hitler reasoned, could sow immense confusion, disrupting communications, misdirecting enemy troops, and spreading widespread panic. Skorzeny listened, instantly grasping the grave implications under international law. The Hague Convention of 1907 was unequivocally clear on this point. Soldiers captured wearing the enemy's uniform would forfeit all their rights as prisoners of war, and could face summary execution as spies. This stark possibility led to extensive deliberations with General Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. Hitler sought to reassure Skorzeny, insisting the tactic was perfectly legitimate, provided his men removed the Allied uniforms before engaging in direct combat. Within days, Skorzeny presented his operational plans to Jodl. He requested 3,300 men, all with a working knowledge of English and American dialects. On October 25th, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht issued an order to every headquarters on the Western Front, calling for English-speaking volunteers for a top-secret commando operation. The directive, signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself, specifically asked for soldiers fluent in the English language and familiar with American idioms. Skorzeny knew with certainty that such a broadcast request would land in the hands of Allied intelligence within days. He pleaded for permission to abort the entire operation, but Hitler flatly denied his request. The Allies did, in fact, intercept the order on November 30th, yet their intelligence officers dismissed it as a clever piece of disinformation. Finding it impossible to believe the Germans would be so brazenly transparent, volunteers poured in from every branch of the German military, the vast majority completely unaware of the true nature of the mission they had signed up for. Fritz Christ, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe private trained as an English translator, imagined he would be interrogating American prisoners far from the front lines. Instead, he found himself confined behind the barbed wire of a training camp established at Grafenwehr, in eastern Bavaria. The security measures were draconian. One man was shot and killed when a letter he wrote home was found to contain too much detail. It was only after their arrival that the volunteers finally learned of their daunting mission. The reality of the manpower Skorzeny had to work with would have been almost comical if the stakes had not been so extraordinarily high. Of the 2,500 men who were ultimately assembled, a mere 10 spoke perfect English and possessed an intimate knowledge of American idioms. Another 30 to 40 could speak English well, but had zero comprehension of American slang. A further 120 to 150 spoke English with moderate proficiency. The rest had only a rudimentary, school-level grasp of the language, barely capable of uttering more than yes or no. Skorzeny would later write that after a few weeks of assessment, the result was frankly terrifying. Those with the most minimal English skills were given a simple instruction. If approached by Americans, they were to shout, "Sorry," then quickly unbutton their trousers and hurry away, feigning a sudden bout of diarrhea. The equipment situation proved to be equally dire. O.B. West was tasked with procuring 15 Sherman tanks, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, and 120 trucks, along with a sufficient supply of British and American uniforms. The actual delivery fell catastrophically short of these requirements. Only 2 Sherman tanks ever arrived, both in deplorable condition, with one breaking down almost immediately. In place of the requested American armor, Skorzeny was issued 5 German Panther tanks, 6 German armored cars, 6 German armored personnel carriers, and 5 Stug assault guns. The Panthers were crudely disguised with sheets of metal cladding, a coat of olive drab paint, and stenciled White Star insignia. Skorzeny himself conceded that they would only fool the youngest American troops, and only if seen from a great distance in the dead of night. The uniform situation was even worse. Many of the uniforms were British, Polish, or even Russian. Some were summer-issue garments, completely unsuitable for the planned December offensive. Others arrived still bearing bloodstains or the telltale P markings of prisoner-of-war clothing. Units across Germany, baffled by the request, simply sent whatever they could find, flooding the brigade with Polish and Russian equipment from commands that had no clue about the operation's true purpose. Ultimately, Skorzeny managed to secure just enough authentic American uniforms and weapons for the commando teams alone. The most proficient English speakers were organized into a special unit designated Einheitsstielau, named for the SS captain who would command them. These teams underwent an intensive training regimen, squeezed into a brutally compressed timeline. They meticulously studied the organizational structure of the American Army, memorizing badges of rank, military customs, and drill procedures. Some were dispatched to prisoner-of-war camps at Kostrin and Limburg to practice their English on captured American soldiers. They watched American films endlessly to perfect their accents and absorb current slang. They committed to memory the names of American brands, sports teams, popular songs, and Hollywood celebrities. The commandos practiced walking like Americans, smoking like Americans, and even chewing gum like Americans. Their missions were stratified into 3 distinct categories. Demolition squads, consisting of 5 to 6 men, were tasked with destroying bridges, ammunition dumps, and fuel depots. Reconnaissance patrols, in teams of 3 to 4, would scout both banks of the Meuse River, passing on fabricated orders to American units they encountered, reversing road signs, removing minefield warnings, and cordoning off roads with signs warning of non-existent mines. Finally, lead commando units were to work in concert with the attacking German forces, cutting telephone lines, destroying radio stations, and issuing counterfeit orders. Every commando was acutely aware of the risks involved. If captured wearing an American uniform, execution was a near certainty. But there was another, more insidious danger. In the chaotic fog of battle, they could easily be shot by their own side, with German troops mistaking them for actual Americans. To prevent this, they were to use a series of specific identification signals. Their vehicles would display a small yellow triangle. Their tanks would keep their guns pointed in specific, prearranged positions, and the soldiers themselves would wear colored scarves, concealed beneath their uniforms. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 gathered near Bad Münstereifel. On the afternoon of December 16th, they began to move out, advancing just behind the 3 attacking panzer divisions. The plan dictated that Skorzeny's disguised forces would maneuver around the spearhead divisions once they reached the Hosven, then race forward to seize the Meuse bridges. The entire operation was utterly dependent on the rapid advance of the 1st SS Panzer Division, commanded by Joachim Peiper. If Peiper's armored spearhead could achieve a swift breakthrough, Skorzeny's disguised troops could slip through the resulting confusion and reach the bridges before American engineers had a chance to destroy them. December 16, 1944, began long before the dawn. Winding through the dark, dense forest of the Ardennes, more than 200,000 German troops launched Hitler's final great offensive in the West. The initial assault achieved complete and total surprise. American forces, spread thinly across a sprawling 80-mile front, were suddenly faced with overwhelming numbers. For inexperienced or battle-weary American divisions, found themselves confronting 30 German divisions, backed by nearly 1,000 tanks. The German artillery barrage shattered the frozen morning stillness. Searchlights bounced off the low-hanging clouds, creating an eerie, artificial daylight over the battlefield. Infantry surged forward through the snow-laden forest. Panzers rumbled ahead on the narrow, winding roads. For the first few hours, everything unfolded precisely according to plan. The Einheitsstielau team successfully infiltrated amidst the confusion. Dressed in American uniforms and driving captured jeeps, they slipped through the chaos of the American retreat. One team drove straight into an American hill town, performed a thorough reconnaissance of its defenses, and then, on their way out, casually redirected an entire American convoy of armor and supplies down the wrong road. To other teams also succeeded in misdirecting Allied convoys, adding to the ever-mounting confusion. They severed telephone wires, reversed road signs, and spread false rumors of German breakthroughs that were far deeper than the actual penetrations. But on December 17th, harsh reality shattered the operation's prospects. The 1st SS Panzer Division failed to reach its objectives on schedule. Fierce American resistance at Elsenborn Ridge denied the Germans access to the crucial northern roads they needed. At St. Vith, American defenders fought with ferocious tenacity, delaying the German timetable by nearly a full week. The rapid, decisive breakthrough that Operation Greif so desperately required never materialized. Skorzeny realized on that same day that his mission's original objectives were now doomed. He attended a staff conference at the 6th Panzer Army's headquarters and proposed that his brigade be deployed as a conventional fighting unit. The request was approved. Panzer Brigade 150 was ordered to assemble south of Malmedy and report to the 1st SS Panzer Division. But the commando teams were already operating behind American lines. Some managed to successfully complete their missions. Others were captured. When they failed password challenges, when nervous American soldiers noticed their British weapons or German-made boots, when their carefully practiced English faltered under pressure, or when they simply could not answer basic questions about American culture. The capture near Awale on December 17th of Paris, Billing, and Schmidt was the spark that ignited the panic. That would ultimately define the operation's true impact. During his interrogation, Schmidt made a statement that sent an electric shock through Allied intelligence. He claimed their mission was merely one part of a much larger operation, to infiltrate the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force and either capture or assassinate General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt genuinely believed this rumor or was deliberately spreading disinformation remains a mystery. No credible evidence has ever surfaced to confirm such a plan ever existed. The actual mission was always to capture the bridges over the Meuse River. But the statement had immediate and dramatic consequences. Within hours, the security detail around Eisenhower was drastically increased. The Supreme Commander found himself a virtual prisoner in his own headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by a phalanx of guards who meticulously checked every single person entering the building. Eisenhower was reportedly furious about the confinement, especially as it stretched through the Christmas holiday. After several days, he angrily declared that he had to get out and that he didn't care if anyone tried to kill him. But the paranoia spread far beyond the protection of Eisenhower. Allied forces, already reeling from the shock of the German offensive, now began to see potential infiltrators lurking everywhere. Checkpoints sprang up all across the Allied rear areas, massively slowing the movement of troops and vital supplies. American military policemen began to interrogate every soldier who passed through, using a barrage of questions specifically designed to unmask Germans posing as Americans. What is the capital of Illinois? Who won the 1940 World Series? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? What team plays at Wrigley Field? Who is married to Betty Grable? Where does the guard stand in a football formation? Who is Frank Sinatra? What is the name of the president's dog? The questions were a dizzying mix of state geography, Baseball statistics, Hollywood gossip, and American slang. The MPs were constantly improvising, creating new questions on the fly based on whatever bit of American trivia they could conjure up. The system was chaotic and frequently absurd. Many genuine American soldiers were unable to answer the questions correctly. Regional differences meant that soldiers from one part of America had no knowledge of obscure details from other regions. Educational disparities meant some Americans had never learned their state capitals or had never followed baseball. The checkpoints created a host of new problems. General Omar Bradley was briefly detained when he correctly identified Springfield as the capital of Illinois, only because the MP interrogating him mistakenly believed the answer was Chicago. Bradley was held until his identity could be officially verified. Brigadier General Bruce Clark was held at gunpoint after he incorrectly stated that the Chicago Cubs played in the American League. A captain ended up spending a week in detention after being caught wearing a pair of German boots he had taken as souvenirs. British soldiers faced particularly acute difficulties when reconnaissance officer David Niven encountered a guard demanding to know who won the 1940 World Series. He could only reply that he hadn't the faintest idea. British troops who were unable to answer questions about American sports or geography were frequently detained until their identities could be confirmed through other means. Some American soldiers, in protest to the absurd interrogations, began to give deliberately wrong answers which only resulted in their own detention. Others grew angry at being questioned so intensely by junior enlisted men, creating tense confrontations that further slowed down a central movement. The paranoia had a significant and detrimental effect on military operations. Troop movements that should have taken mere hours now required days, as every single vehicle was stopped and every occupant was rigorously questioned. Supply convoys sat idle for long stretches at checkpoints, while their drivers struggled to prove their American identity. Units rushing to reinforce threatened sectors of the front were delayed by repeated interrogations. Commanders found their orders being questioned by subordinates who suspected that anyone and everyone might be a German infiltrator. The psychological impact on the German infiltrators themselves was severe. Those still operating behind American lines found themselves unable to move freely. The cultural questions cruelly exposed the inadequacies of their preparations. They had diligently studied military procedures, learned rank insignia, and memorized the organization of the American Army, but they had never anticipated being interrogated about baseball statistics, Hollywood marriages, or obscure regional slang. Some of the infiltrators tried to avoid the checkpoints altogether, attempting to travel cross-country or through dense forests. This only served to make them more conspicuous to American patrols. Others tried to bluff their way through the checkpoints, offering up weak excuses for why they could not answer the questions. He succeeded. Between December 16th and December 31st, American forces captured 23 members of Operation Greif. 16 of them were captured in December of 1944. The team leader, Gunther Schultz, was captured later and tried in May 1945. Each captured infiltrator was put on trial before a military court. The legal situation under international law was perfectly clear. Article 23 of the Hague Convention concerning the laws of land warfare specifically forbade the improper use of the enemy's military insignia and uniform. Soldiers captured wearing enemy uniforms while conducting military operations could be tried as spies, rather than being treated as prisoners of war. The first trial commenced at Henry Chappelle on December 21st. Paris Billing and Schmidt faced charges of violating the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting military operations. The evidence against them was overwhelming. They had been captured in American uniforms, carrying American weapons and American identification, but wearing their German field gray uniforms underneath. The trial was swift. All three were found guilty and sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 23, 1944, just 2 days before Christmas, the sentences were carried out. American military police led the three Germans to the execution site. Captain J. Elser of the 633rd Medical Clearing Station pinned white paper targets over their hearts. Schmidt's glasses were removed. The prisoners were blindfolded. Military police formed the firing squad. Billing shouted, "Long live our Führer, Adolf Hitler." At the moment of execution, the rifles fired as one. All three men died instantly. Their bodies were cut down from the post, carried away, and buried. Eventually, they would be interred at the German military cemetery in Lommel, Belgium, where they rest today alongside more than 39,000 of their fellow German war dead. 13 additional participants in Operation Greif were tried and executed at either Henry Chappelle or High. Between December 21st and December 31st, Wilhelm Wiesenfeld, Manfred Brani, Hans Reich, Arno Kroer, Gutter Schills, or Hartmiegel Horst Gerlich, Norbert Pollock, Rolf Benjamin Meyer, Hans Witzig, Otto Arndt, Alfred Franz, and Anton Morik all faced firing squads. Each execution followed a military trial. Each trial found the defendants guilty of violating the Hague Convention. Each sentence was reviewed and personally approved by senior commanders. The executions were carried out with cold military precision, without malice, but also without mercy. Team leader Gunther Schultz was tried by a military commission in May 1945 and was executed near Braunschweig on June 14. Why his trial was delayed until after Germany's surrender remains unclear. Who specifically ordered his execution to be carried out also remains uncertain. The United States Ninth Army carried out the sentence. In total, 17 participants in Operation Greif were executed for the crime of wearing enemy uniforms. The operation's tactical accomplishments were minimal at best. No bridges were captured. No major demolitions succeeded. No critical communications were permanently disrupted. A few road signs were reversed. Some telephone lines were cut. Several American units did receive false orders, though most of these mistakes were quickly rectified. But the psychological impact of the operation vastly exceeded any of its meager tactical results. For weeks, American forces operated under the pervasive assumption that German infiltrators could be anywhere. The paranoia affected decision-making at every single level of command. Eisenhower's confinement meant that the Supreme Commander was isolated from any direct observation of battlefield conditions. During the critical opening phase of the offensive, the delays caused by the checkpoints slowed the American response to the German penetration. Units that should have reached threatened sectors in a matter of hours took days to arrive. The widespread suspicion degraded unit cohesion. American soldiers who should have been focused on fighting the Germans to their front were instead consumed with worry about possible Germans hidden among them. The Battle of the Bulge itself proceeded independently of Operation Greif's failure. German forces drove deep into the American lines, creating the bulge that ultimately gave the battle its name. At Bastogne, American defenders held out against all odds despite being completely surrounded. On December 22, when German officers delivered an ultimatum to surrender, the acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, responded with a single typed word that would become legendary to the German commander: nuts. The American commander, when the confused German officers asked what it meant, they were bluntly told it was the same as go to hell. The 101st Airborne held Bastogne until they were finally relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army on December 26. Patton's forces had executed a remarkable 90-degree turn, driving north with incredible speed to break the siege. By early January, Allied counterattacks had eliminated the Bulge and fully restored the front lines. The battle lasted from December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945. More than 1 million men participated, making it the largest single battle ever fought by the United States Army outside of the Civil War. American casualties exceeded 80,000, including 19,000 killed and 23,000 captured. German casualties were similar, but Germany lacked the ability to replace those devastating losses. The battle marked the definitive end of Germany's capacity to conduct offensive operations in the West. Hitler had gambled everything on the Ardennes offensive, and he had lost. For Otto Skorzeny, Operation Greif was effectively over by December 17, when Panzer Brigade 150 was converted to conventional operations. On December 21, the brigade attempted to capture Malmedy but was repulsed after several failed assaults. Skorzeny himself was wounded by artillery shrapnel near Ligniville. He recovered and continued to serve until Germany's final surrender. In May 1945, Skorzeny surrendered to the 30th Infantry Regiment. He would spend the next 2 years in custody, awaiting his trial. At the Dachau trials in 1947, Skorzeny and 9 other officers of Panzer Brigade 150 faced charges of improperly using American uniforms by entering combat disguised and treacherously firing upon American forces. They were also charged with wrongfully obtaining American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from prisoner of war camps. Skorzeny's defense hinged on a crucial distinction: his men had been explicitly ordered to remove their American uniforms before engaging in actual combat. The disguises were intended for infiltration and deception, not for fighting. A surprise defense witness proved to be decisive. FFEO Thomas, a former British Special Operations executive agent, testified that Allied forces had used identical tactics. He stated that he had personally worn German uniforms behind enemy lines during missions in France. The military tribunal drew a clear distinction between using enemy uniforms during combat and using them for the purpose of deception. It could not be proven that Skorzeny had ever ordered his men to fight while wearing American uniforms. The tribunal acquitted all of the defendants. The verdict was highly controversial. 17 of Skorzeny's men had been executed for the very same actions, for which he was now acquitted. The difference appeared to be a matter of timing and evidence. The men executed in December 1944 had been captured red-handed in American uniforms. Skorzeny, tried in 1947, was able to demonstrate that his orders explicitly prohibited combat while disguised. The trial established an important legal precedent regarding the laws of war. Using enemy uniforms for deception was ruled a legitimate ruse de guerre, provided that the combatants removed the disguises before actually engaging in combat. This distinction would influence the interpretation of international law for decades to come. Skorzeny did not remain in custody for long. In 1948, he escaped from an internment camp in Darmstadt. Former SS officers, themselves disguised as American military police, facilitated his escape. Some historians have speculated that American intelligence may have tacitly allowed or even assisted in the escape, though no concrete evidence has ever confirmed this. Skorzeny spent time hiding on a Bavarian farm, then moved between Salzburg and Paris, before eventually settling in Spain. He later worked as a military advisor to the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Skorzeny died of cancer on July 5, 1975, in Madrid at the age of 67. He never once expressed any regret for Operation Greif or for any of his other wartime actions. The checkpoint interrogations became a permanent part of American military folklore. The questions about baseball and Hollywood, state capitals, and movie stars became symbols of how a shared cultural identity could serve as a powerful security tool. During a crisis, the improvised system, however chaotic it may have been, proved remarkably effective at exposing infiltrators, whose language training simply could not replicate the casual, ingrained cultural knowledge that Americans absorbed naturally from childhood. Being an American, it turned out, involved far more than just speaking English or wearing the right uniform. It involved a universe of shared cultural experiences, common references, and collective memories that could not be adequately taught to foreigners in a few hurried weeks of training. This cultural cohesion, so often taken for granted, proved to be a formidable national security asset when put to the test by enemy infiltrators. The 17 men executed for their part in Operation Greif are remembered today primarily through military cemeteries and historical accounts. Their graves at Lommel are maintained with the same meticulous care as those of soldiers who died in conventional combat. The cemetery makes no distinction between those who were executed as spies and those who were killed in battle. They are all German war dead. Manfred Purris was 23 years old at the time of his execution. Gunther Billing, 21, remained a convinced Nazi to his very final moment. Wilhelm Schmidt, 24, faced his death with a quiet resignation. Each was someone's son, and perhaps someone's brother. Each had made a series of choices that led them to that frozen morning in Belgium, to those posts, to those blindfolds, and to those rifles. Operation Greif's legacy extended far beyond its tactical failure. The operation demonstrated that special operations cannot compensate for a conventional military failure. Skorzeny's infiltrators could not possibly capture the bridges if Piper's panzers never reached them. No amount of deception and confusion could ever substitute for the military breakthrough. That never occurred. Yet, the operation succeeded in creating a level of disruption far exceeding anything the actual infiltrators managed to accomplish. The mere possibility of infiltration created a panic that affected hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This vast gap between perception and reality became a key lesson in modern strategic thinking about psychological warfare. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945. Allied forces resumed their advance toward Germany. Within 4 months, the Third Reich had collapsed. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The 17 executed participants of Operation Greif were already in their graves. Their war had ended violently on Belgian soil, far from their homes. Their operation had failed in its tactical objectives, but had succeeded in creating a state of confusion and fear that significantly hampered Allied operations during the critical opening phase of the battle. The British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, speaking to Parliament on January 18, 1945, while the battle was still raging, declared it undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory. Churchill explicitly noted that the Americans had engaged 30 to 40 men for every one British soldier engaged, emphasizing that this was fundamentally an American battle and an American victory. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball had no idea they were creating folklore. They were simply solving an immediate problem, improvising security measures on the spot to identify potential enemies. Their solution worked because it was rooted in a genuine, shared culture. Americans knew about baseball and Hollywood and state capitals because they grew up as Americans, absorbing that knowledge naturally and effortlessly. Germans attempting to impersonate Americans could study the facts, but they could not replicate that natural cultural fluency. This distinction between learned facts and absorbed culture proved to be decisive. The German failure demonstrated a principle that remains just as relevant today. Cultural knowledge absorbed through lived experience over many years cannot be quickly taught to adults from different backgrounds. Modern special operations forces have learned from the mixed results of Operation Greif. Intelligence services now spend years preparing deep cover agents, precisely because cultural fluency cannot be quickly taught. Language training, factual knowledge, and behavioral coaching are all necessary, but they are not sufficient. Genuine cultural fluency requires immersion and, most importantly, time. The fundamental challenge persists across the decades. Culture is absorbed through experience. It is not taught in classrooms. Operation Greif demonstrated both the potential and the profound limits of special operations. Small units conducting unconventional operations can create a level of disruption far beyond their numbers. The psychological impact can exceed the tactical results by orders of magnitude. But without conventional military success to provide the necessary conditions, special operations cannot achieve strategic objectives. Deception can never be a substitute for victory. For historians and military strategists, Operation Greif remains a compelling case study. It exemplifies how ambitious planning, when disconnected from a realistic assessment of capabilities, inevitably leads to failure. Hitler's late war decision-making consistently followed this pattern: grandiose in conception, inadequate in resources, and divorced from operational reality. Yet, the operation's unintended success in creating panic validated the concept that psychological warfare, and deception can be powerful force multipliers. The 17 men who died before firing squads for wearing enemy uniforms would be largely forgotten today, were it not for the historical record that preserves their stories. They were not particularly important men. They accomplished very little before their capture. Their operation failed comprehensively. Yet their executions marked an important moment in both military and legal history, clarifying the application of international law regarding the use of enemy uniforms in warfare. The legacy lives on in the lessons their operation taught. Identity verification remains crucial for security. Cultural knowledge remains difficult for outsiders to fake quickly. Special operations remain valuable but cannot substitute for conventional military success. The laws of war remain important but are subject to interpretation based on circumstances and evidence. The human cost of war extends beyond those killed in combat to include those executed after capture. For violations of the laws of war, each execution was a human being with a family, a history, and a potential, all ended by bullets fired on legal authority after a proper trial. The graves at Lommelmark lives cut short by war and its brutal logic. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball were American soldiers who followed their orders, and then had to carry the psychological burdens of executing prisoners, even enemies convicted of espionage. Operation Greif failed to capture a single bridge. It caused no major destruction. It killed relatively few Americans directly, but the fear it created delayed reinforcements, disrupted command decisions, and consumed vital resources during critical days. The indirect impact, impossible to quantify with precision, unquestionably shaped the battle's opening phase. The fact that the infiltrators were caught, tried, and executed within a matter of days demonstrated American military justice, operating under the immense pressure of wartime. The speed from capture to execution reflected the conditions of combat and established a precedent, though modern standards would certainly require more deliberate proceedings. The Battle of the Bulge ground on for 5 more weeks after the infiltrators were executed, ultimately resulting in a German defeat and the complete elimination of Germany's strategic reserve. The story of Operation Greif and the Battle of the Bulge serves as a stark reminder that warfare encompasses far more than just battlefield operations. Psychological impact, cultural factors, and perception often matter just as much as tactical results. A failed operation that creates widespread panic may achieve more strategic disruption than a successful operation that remains entirely undetected. The checkpoint interrogations, as absurd as they sometimes seemed, worked because they tested a kind of knowledge that genuine Americans possess naturally, while the infiltrators, despite all their training, simply could not replicate it. The American soldiers who fought in the Battle of the Bulge faced not only a powerful enemy offensive, but also the profound psychological burden of suspecting that enemies might be anywhere, wearing any uniform, and speaking any language. This erosion of certainty marked a new dimension in warfare, one that would continue to influence military operations and security procedures for generations to come.